one of the number one increasers of anxiety, depression, and stress and overwhelm is isolation. Personal development industry is like a broken mirror, right? Everybody's taking a piece of it and they say, this is the only piece that's going to solve all your problems. You got the, fitness guys that think if you just work out, you'll be fine. You got your therapist where you could stay there for 3-4 years talking about your problems, where talking about the problem actually becomes the problem. And then you have these guys who have made a lot of money that think they can solve everything all at once just by giving you some advice or public speaking and just talking. And I was like, it's broken, because what that does is no single one of those is going to fix everything. You need all of them.
Yeah.
And you also need the community. You need people, because where people come into play is one of the main neurochemicals in your brain is oxytocin. Oxytocin promotes pro-social behavior, trust, bonding, creative, like wanting to be with others, right? But another thing that a lot of people don't know is it increases your pain tolerance. And so if you can increase your pain tolerance by connecting with other people, then the opportunity to go out and take on challenges outside of that realm becomes a whole lot easier. So I wanted to create something that would be able to incorporate all of those aspects and give people the opportunity to experiment with that. Because I figured if they can try just one of these things and experience it for themselves, they'll actually know what health feels like. And when they can have that experience, then all of a sudden when they go home, they can take that to their family, to their kids, and it can spread a whole lot wider. And so that was my vision. And I was just trying to find the best way to bring that to pass.
Yeah. That's incredible. It makes me think of the community here at Mountain Ops and how important that is, that you don't go it alone, that when you're around other people, you're part of a community. I didn't know your pain tolerance goes up. Why does that happen? Just that oxytocin that's released, or are you just watching other people, their examples, you're energized by the community, or kind of all of the above? Or
well, kind of interesting enough. So here's a study that shows how this works a little bit. Okay, so what they did is they put someone in a chair and they were going to elicit a shock to the person. Okay, and what they did is they brought in different people, someone they knew, someone that was a stranger, and then by themselves. And then they were measuring the pain tolerance in the brain of how much they were able to take. Okay, first shock, he had the most amount of pain. He said it really hurt. And then they were also able to measure that inside the brain. Then they brought in a stranger that was a little bit closer to them.
So he was by himself the first time?
Yeah, by himself the first time. Second time they brought in a stranger, gave him a shock, didn't feel it as much, not as much pain was registered. Then they brought in a loved one who held his hand, and all of a sudden it was nowhere near what the first one was.
Wow. And
this is trackable, because your body responds to people. We have been built to work in communities, to work with other people, to have that support. And that's why it's necessary. But so often, the thing that our brain wants the least is trust. Because trust equals vulnerability. I have to be vulnerable in order to trust you, that you're going to have my back, that you're going to be there for me when nothing goes wrong. And so when everything goes wrong. So when you give trust, that's something that your brain wants to avoid. And so a lot of times that's why we close up. That's why we distance. Right? Like when we have a scary event, your brain all of a sudden goes into this search engine where it says, okay, well, where was I safe? Well, my house, my bed, by myself. Nobody was there, could do anything to me. That's where I want to go. And when we do that, though, one of the number one increasers of anxiety, depression, and stress and overwhelm is isolation. And so it does the exact opposite of what we want to. And in today's world, we're fairly safe. And so when we can go towards people and trust, and we can start to build those bonds, that oxytocin then is able to take place and build those connections in our brain to where when we're not necessarily with people and we're taking on challenges, we have that ability to do it.
That's awesome. That's powerful, man. So if there's somebody listening that's struggling to trust or to be vulnerable to build that trust, like how do you coach somebody through that? Like what are some steps that they can take? Because it sounds like it's trusting people, trusting the process. And sometimes people have had experiences. I myself have had experience with people where it's like, do I, how do I trust this next individual? Will the same thing happen? And PTSD kind of, exists, but maybe that's just a fear. Maybe that's just a resistance. Maybe that's an adversarial effect on a spiritual level, even so what does somebody have to do to take some action and take some steps? What do you coach people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, one of the first baselines, like a definition that you have to set before you go into this realm is like the fear is real. Whatever's real as you is your perception. Your perception is reality. A lot of times we think just because it's in your head, right, that it's not real, but it's your experience. So it is real. Yeah. And you have to treat it as such. But where you start, if I'm working with a client and they're sitting there and they're struggling wanting to trust people, start small, work big. You don't want to go to the person who's your biggest trigger or the thing that's your biggest trigger and throw yourself into the deep end of the pool. You're going to end up just more traumatized than you were in the first place, right? But to a certain extent, you have to, like, the only way to overcome fear is to go through it. Yeah. So one way or another, you got to start somewhere. Yep. And typically where I do it is like, I don't know, just going back to a story of my life. This may be an easier way to teach the principle.
Good.
So I loved football. I was obsessive about it. I gave all of myself to it. I woke up every day. I caught 100 passes, went to school, worked out till about 6, went home, went to bed, did it again every day. That's where my friends were. That's where my passion was. That was my identity. Okay? In that, I received about 10 plus concussions by my junior year. Okay? Went to the doctors because I was having a lot of issues, bloody nose. I was passing out and I had a lot of stuff going on. And the doctor said, hey, Brock, you cannot play football anymore. So from one day to the next, there was something that my whole life revolved around that was now gone. Okay, so I was sitting there, I went feeling bad for myself, laying on the ground at home, and I started to isolate, and I didn't really want to go out because I was like, what is there? And so one night I was laying on the ground and feeling bad for myself, and I realized that nobody was going to come and save me, that I had to save myself, and I had to get myself into a place to where I could be okay, that my identity didn't revolve around this sport. And so what I did is I sat down and I made a list, and I started to write down everything that I liked about the world, because I figured in that moment I felt very fragile and weak. I felt like I was very vulnerable, and I didn't like that. And
this is you as a teenager.
Yeah.
Did you have coaching to do that, or is this just like, okay, this is what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a piece of paper out and I'm going to write down.
Yeah, this was just me.
Kind of some mature thinking at that age.
It was the best I could come up with because I felt fragile and I wanted to feel strong.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I was like, in order to feel strong, I need to get to know myself. So I wrote down everything that I liked about the world. Everything from apples to oranges to experiences that I loved. I loved being around kind people to who I liked being around. And then I made another list of everything that I didn't like. And I said, if I'm going to be strong, I got to face these. And so some of them were a lot heavier than others. And so I started small, worked big. I picked things that were still scary that I didn't like. Like, for example, a big one at the time was sarcasm. Hated sarcasm because I felt like it was just a way for people to be mean without having to be direct.
Yeah, I've felt that same way at times. Yeah.
And so I would put myself around sarcastic people. And when I started to get annoyed and I got that scratching inside of me and I wanted to I felt uncomfortable, I started to breathe and I was like, okay, I'm going to be strong here. And if I need to say something, I will. And I started to kind of try to grow strength in those moments. And that was the best way that I could think of how I was going to grow strong. And that then has translated into a lot of other aspects of my life. And I still reiterate that list every year. But that's the best way that I know how.
Yeah, that's amazing. So get out the piece of paper, get out the Conquer Nandy journal and write down all these things. The world is beautiful around you. I love, there's a scripture, I am come that they might have life and they might have it more abundantly. There's an abundance of life, but you at that young age choosing to do those things, that's a way to find an abundant life.